You probably think ancient humans were fragile. You've heard the number. The average person in the Stone Age lived just 30 years. When you picture that, you probably imagine a world of exhausted, broken bodies, people collapsing before they ever watch their children grow up, a species barely hanging on, short lives, hard deaths. And you look at your grandfather, still alive at 74, and you feel grateful. Thank God for modern medicine. But here's what nobody tells you. That number is a lie, not a mistake, not an exaggeration, a genuine statistical illusion that has quietly shaped the way all of us think about human biology, ancient life, and what your body was actually built to do. And once you understand what that number is really measuring, once you see the trick hiding inside the statistic, you will never look at a history textbook the same way again. Here is what is actually happening. The average lifespan of 30 years doesn't mean ancient adults were dying at 30. It means so many babies and small children were dying before they even had a chance to grow up, that when you average all those short lives in with the long ones, the number collapses. You are not looking at a typical life. You are looking at a mathematical illusion created by mass childhood death. If half the children in a population die before their fifth birthday, and the survivors go on to live until 70, the average lifespan still lands somewhere around 35 or 40. The average looks like nobody made it to old age. But that is not what happened. The adults were living long lives. The tragedy was in the children. Think about that. This is one of the most important reframes in all of human history, and it changes everything, including what you think you know about your own body. So why were those children dying? And here is the bigger question. What does that tell us about what your body was actually designed to survive? Let us go back. Not to Greece or Rome, not to the medieval period. We are going 300,000 years back, to the first anatomically modern humans, walking across what is now East Africa, living in small bands of 25 to 50 people. No antibiotics, no vaccines, no hospitals, no clean water systems, just bodies trying to live. In 2007, anthropologists John Gervin at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and Hillard Kaplan at the University of New Mexico published what became one of the most important papers in the history of human demography. It was called Longevity Among Hunter-Gatherers, a Cross-Cultural Examination, and it appeared in the journal Population and Development Review. Their task was staggering in its ambition. They gathered survival data from every remaining hunter-gatherer society on Earth, groups like the Kung San of Botswana's Kalahari Desert, the Ache of Paraguay, the Hadza of Tanzania, the Chimain of Bolivia, people whose way of life had not changed meaningfully in thousands of years. And they asked the most fundamental question in human biology, stripped of modern medicine and modern comforts. How long does a human being actually live? The answer destroyed the 30-year myth completely. Gervin and Kaplan found that among hunter-gatherers who survived past childhood, past the brutal gauntlet of infancy and early disease, the modal age of death was between 68 and 78 years. Not 30, not 40, 68 to 78. These were people eating wild food, sleeping on bare ground, running barefoot across savanna, with zero access to modern medicine. And they were living into their late 60s and 70s. Your body is not broken. It never was. But now the real question arrives. If ancient adults were living to 70, why were so many children dying? And here is where the story gets darker and far more precise. In 1979, anthropologist Nancy Howell at the University of Toronto published Demography of the Dobe Kung, a landmark study of the Kung San people living in the Kalahari. The Kung had been observed by researchers since the 1960s, but Howell's work was the first rigorous demographic analysis of a surviving hunter-gatherer population. She collected birth and death records, interviewed elders, and reconstructed population patterns that had never been documented in such detail anywhere on Earth. What she found was devastating. Among the Kung San, approximately 45% of all children died before they reached the age of 15. Not 5%, not 10%, 45%. Nearly half of every generation was gone before it finished growing up. And the largest single category of childhood death was infection. Respiratory infections, gastrointestinal infections, infections that today are treatable with a single course of antibiotics, cured in a week. Infections that, in a world without medicine, were simply death sentences for small bodies that hadn't yet built their full immune defenses. Every time a child gets an ear infection today and a doctor writes a prescription, that prescription is doing something that 45% of ancient children needed and never got. In 1996, anthropologist Kim Hill at the University of New Mexico and his colleague A. Magdalena Hurtado published Ache Life History, The Ecology and Demography of a Foraging People, a 25-year study of the Ache people of Paraguay, one of the most detailed records of pre-modern human survival ever assembled. Hill and Hurtado tracked births, deaths, marriages, and causes of death across decades. Their numbers were precise and they were brutal. Among the Ache, 43% of children died before reaching adulthood. The causes told a story. The largest killers in order were respiratory illness, gastrointestinal illness, and violence, both conflict within groups and between neighboring communities. Infectious disease accounted for the overwhelming majority of early deaths. But here is the part that stops most people cold, the adults who survived. Among adult Ache who reached age 20, the median expected remaining lifespan was another 55 years. They were projected to live into their mid-70s, without antibiotics, without vaccines, without a single hospital anywhere on the continent. The human body, left to live out its natural span, had a ceiling of somewhere between 65 and 80 years. That ceiling has not changed. Modern medicine didn't raise the ceiling. It just made sure more people actually reached it. Read that again slowly. Modern medicine didn't make humans live longer. It made sure fewer humans died before they got the chance to live at all. In 2004, researchers Rachel Kaspari at Central Michigan University and Sang-Hoon Lee at the University of California, Riverside published a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences titled "Older Age Becomes Common Late in Human Evolution." They had done something remarkable. They analyzed the teeth and bones of 768 fossil specimens spanning 4 species of ancient humans: Australopithecus, Homo erectus, Neanderthals, and early modern Homo sapiens. Teeth are extraordinary timekeepers. The wear patterns on ancient molars tell researchers how old a person was when they died, at least roughly, with enough precision to compare populations across millions of years. Kaspari and Lee used this data to calculate what they called the OY ratio, the ratio of older adults to younger adults in each prehistoric population. They then tracked how this ratio shifted across 3 million years of human evolution. For most of human prehistory, the ratio barely moved. Old adults were rare. The young died, the slightly older died, and very few individuals lived significantly beyond their reproductive years. Then something happened. About 30,000 years ago, in the time of the European Upper Paleolithic, the era of cave paintings and carved figurines, and the first explosion of human art and culture, the OY ratio suddenly tripled. Old people became dramatically more common than they had ever been. Kaspari and Lee argued this wasn't a genetic change in human longevity. It was behavioral and social. More people were surviving to old age because of how communities organized themselves. Better food sharing, better protection of the vulnerable, better transmission of accumulated knowledge across generations. And here is the part that should unsettle you. The same paper argued that this dramatic shift in survival, this sudden abundance of grandparents in human communities, may have directly triggered the creative explosion visible in the archaeological record at exactly the same time. The cave paintings at Lascaux in France, the carved Venus figurines found across Central Europe, the first bone flutes. Because grandparents changed everything. They were the living libraries, the ones who remembered the last drought, who knew which plants were poisonous in which season, which wounds could be treated with what roots, and which meant death within days. When they survived longer, their knowledge survived longer. And some researchers argue that the agricultural revolution, the invention of writing, the emergence of civilization itself, none of it might have been possible without humans first learning to keep old people alive. Think about that. Your grandmother's survival was not just personal. It may have been the biological prerequisite for everything humans ever built. What killed ancient people wasn't age. It was the absence of something most of us have never once stopped to think about. That something was the antibiotic. Here is the actual scale of what we are talking about. Before Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin in 1928 at St. Mary's Hospital in London, and before it was mass-produced and introduced to the broader world during the Second World War in 1943, a simple bacterial infection could end any person's life at any age. A cut that got infected, a tooth abscess that spread to the jaw, pneumonia after 3 days of cold rain, strep throat in a child with no medicine cabinet to open, childbed fever in a new mother, scarlet fever, typhoid. These were not exotic medieval plagues. These were daily, ordinary threats that killed people of every age in every society on Earth until fewer than 100 years ago. In the year 1900, the three leading causes of death in the United States were pneumonia, tuberculosis, and gastrointestinal infections. Combined, they killed roughly 800 out of every 100,000 Americans every single year. By 2000, that number had collapsed to fewer than 60 per 100,000. The human body didn't change. The infections just stopped winning. And here is the number that reframes everything else. The average life expectancy in the United States in 1900 was 47 years. By 2000, it had risen to 77 years, a 30-year leap in 1 century. And when epidemiologists trace exactly where those 30 years came from, they find that the overwhelming majority, more than 70%, came from reductions in childhood and infant mortality. Not from adults living longer, from children actually surviving. This is the same story as the Stone Age, the same trap, the same statistical illusion wearing a different century's clothing. The ancient 30-year lifespan and the 1900 American 47-year lifespan both collapsed under the same force. Mass early death pulling the average down. The natural human lifespan hadn't changed in 30,000 years. What changed was how many of us actually get to live it. Now here is the unexpected connection, the one that reframes your daily life in a way you will not be able to unsee. You wash your hands before eating. You probably don't think much about why. Maybe you call it cleanliness. Maybe you call it habit. Maybe it's just something you do automatically before meals, or when you come home from outside, barely registering it at all. That is not cleanliness. That is 3,000 years of accumulated human tragedy compressed into 10 seconds of tap water and soap. In 1847, a Hungarian physician named Ignaz Semmelweis at the Vienna General Hospital noticed something that everyone else around him had overlooked. Women who gave birth in the maternity ward, staffed by medical students, had a mortality rate from infection of somewhere between 10 and 35%. On the worst months, more than 1 in 3 mothers died days after delivery. Women who gave birth in the adjacent wards staffed by midwives had a mortality rate below 4%. The wards were in the same building, the same hospital, the same city. The only difference was who was delivering the babies. The medical students were coming directly from performing autopsies on the dead and moving straight into the delivery room, carrying what Semmelweis called cadaverous particles on their unwashed hands. He introduced mandatory hand washing with a chlorinated lime solution. The death rate in his ward dropped to below 1% almost immediately. He was ridiculed. His colleagues dismissed him. The medical establishment refused to accept the idea that doctors' hands were killing mothers. He was eventually committed to a mental institution where he died of sepsis, an infection, in 1865. It took the world another 30 years to fully accept what he had already proven with his own data. Hand washing is not a hygiene preference. It is the single most powerful pathogen interruption technology humans have ever discovered. A 10-second ritual that does more work than most people's entire medicine cabinet. Gervin and Kaplan's hunter-gatherer data shows that in populations without any sanitation infrastructure, gastrointestinal infections alone could account for more than a quarter of all childhood deaths. Every morning, when you run the water and reach for the soap, you are doing something that a grieving mother in Vienna in 1847 would have begged a doctor to do before he touched her child. Everything your immune system fears was shaped by a world without antibiotics. And everything that saves you today was learned by watching what that world did to children. Here is the societal implication, and it is one that should settle somewhere deeper than your intellect. In ancient hunter-gatherer societies, the people who survived to old age, to 65, to 70, to 75, were extraordinary. Not because they were genetically superior to the ones who died young, but because they had run an obstacle course that killed half the people they grew up alongside. Every 65-year-old in the Paleolithic had already watched neighbors die of infected wounds, survived droughts that killed the weak, outlasted winters with no stored food, and watched children they loved disappear to fevers that modern parents would treat with a single prescription called in on a Tuesday. The old were rare, and because they were rare, they were revered. They were the living libraries. The ones who remembered the last drought, the last famine, the last time the river flooded, the ones who knew which plants were poisonous, which berries caused convulsions, which wounds needed packing, and which meant death within a day. In 2013, anthropologist Christopher Kuzawa at Northwestern University and his colleagues published research arguing that the human brain continues to refine itself structurally well into a person's 40s and even 50s, not just emotionally, structurally. The neural networks that process accumulated experience, pattern recognition, and long-term judgment are still maturing at ages when many people today feel somehow past their peak. Your brain was built for a long life. Evolution did not design a 30-year brain. It designed a brain that gets more valuable with experience, that sharpens with accumulated pattern recognition, that was meant to carry knowledge across generations and share it with the young. The 30-year lifespan myth didn't just mislead historians. It quietly told a generation of people that aging was somehow unnatural, that old bodies were a modern invention, when in reality, old bodies are the oldest thing about us. Now here's the contrast that should make you actually feel the weight of what we've been talking about. In 1900, just 126 years ago, if you were born in rural India, your life expectancy at birth was approximately 24 years. Not because adults were dying young, because so many infants and children died that the statistical average collapsed beneath them. A person who reached age 20 in rural India in 1900 could still expect to live another 40 or 50 years. But most people never got there. Measles, cholera, smallpox, typhoid, infections that today are either vaccinated away or cured with a 3-day course of pills. By 2022, India's life expectancy had risen to approximately 70 years. Same bodies, same brains, same genetic ceiling for human longevity. The biology didn't change. The infections just ran out of unvaccinated children to kill. The world didn't get healthier because humans got stronger. It got healthier because we finally started protecting the weakest ones. Now let us return to where we started, because I need you to feel this differently than you felt it at the beginning. You probably thought ancient humans were fragile, short-lived, 30 years and gone. You probably thought modern medicine had extended the human lifespan in some fundamental biological way, that we had pushed back the clock, that we were somehow more durable, more capable of survival than the people who came before us. Here is the truth. Your body's maximum ceiling, the oldest age a healthy human being can naturally reach, is probably not very different from what it was 30,000 years ago. Gervin and Kaplan's 2007 data puts the modal adult lifespan for hunter-gatherers at 68 to 78 years. Modern populations, with all of medicine and nutrition and sanitation working in their favor, show a broadly similar pattern. What changed is not the ceiling. What changed is the floor. In the Stone Age, 45% of children never made it to adulthood. Today, in high-income countries, that number is below 1%. That single shift, that single reduction in early death, accounts for the dramatic rise in average life expectancy that we associate with modern civilization. We didn't push the ceiling up. We made sure vastly more people actually got to reach it. And every time you see a child receiving a vaccine, every time a parent carries their kid to a doctor for an antibiotic at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, every time a hospital ward keeps a premature infant alive in an incubator, You are watching the continuation of a story that began 300,000 years ago on the East African savanna. The story of a species that was always designed to live long lives. That just kept losing its children before they ever got the chance. The next time someone tells you that humans weren't meant to live past 50, that aging is somehow unnatural, that our bodies were built for shorter lives, you can tell them exactly what the numbers actually show. The 30-year figure was never a measure of adult life. It was a record of childhood death. It was the mathematical shadow left behind by every infant who died of a respiratory infection that could have been cleared in 3 days with a pill, by every small body taken by cholera that could have been prevented by clean water, by every child killed by a disease that now exists only in the frozen memory of a laboratory vial. Your body was built to last. The evidence is in every surviving skeleton from the Paleolithic, in every Kungsan elder who outlived the average, in every grandmother who died at 74, after the statistics said she shouldn't have made it. The evidence is in Kasperi and Lee's 2004 fossil analysis, showing that old people have been part of human communities for at least 30,000 years. The evidence is in the cave paintings at Lascaux, which may exist precisely because a grandmother survived long enough to teach someone how to mix the ochre. You are not living longer than your ancestors were designed to live. You are simply living to the age your body always expected to reach. And somewhere right now, a child is receiving a vaccine. The descendant of the discovery Edward Jenner made in 1796, when he injected a boy named James Phipps with cowpox material and changed the trajectory of our entire species. That child doesn't know any of this history. They just know the needle stung. But their 70-year-old self, standing at a window someday, watching their own grandchildren run across a yard, will be living proof of everything we just uncovered together. The 30-year lifespan was never the story of human life. It was the story of human loss. And we have spent 300,000 years slowly, painfully, one discovery at a time, learning how to stop it. If this reframed the way you think about your own body and your own place in human history, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to keep going deeper into the hidden science of human survival, the statistics that lie, and the ancient biology still running quietly inside you, you know where to find us. Because history has been telling you the wrong story. We are just here to fix that.